So welcome to Cinematic Radiance. This week I'm going live with a community live edit, and we're going to be going through the Radiant pack. Along this kind of little Lightroom journey, I'm going to have plenty of tips and tricks for you all, so that way even if you're not a Visual Flow user, you can not only see how kind of the whole system works, but there's going to be Lightroom tips and things along the way that'll make your time well spent. So I appreciate each of you who have RSVP'd and are showing up here. You guys could be doing a ton of things with your time, and the fact that you're here to focus on your photography, your craft, it means the world. So thank you for being here. As always, I want to just quickly launch and say this. So if you are new to our Facebook group, what you can expect in our mastermind is weekly lives just like this one. We do lectures, we do community edits, we have how-to guides, free tutorials, support and guidance, and the most amazing group of peers. And I see some of you guys are joining in now. If you guys are joining in, leave me a comment. Let me know where you guys are tuning in from, what you're drinking, all the above. And yeah, welcome. The other thing I was going to mention is whether you're new or whether you've been here for a while, we have this section on the group called the guides. And within the guides, we save each of these different live lectures so that way you guys can reference them at any time. So if you're a Visual Flow user, we have tons of guides there on how to get the most out of your presets. We're basically building guides out for every single service, every product that we offer, in addition to just valuable guides that can help you all in photography and creativity and business development, mindset, all of that. So check out the guides as well. Okay. Last thing for today, we're specifically talking about the Radiant pack. So you guys can learn more if you don't use Visual Flow presets. Feel free to ask the community what they think. You can learn more about this specific pack at vfpresets.com. And if you click Shop Bundles, we'll be using the Radiant pack along with the AI retouching toolkit today. Okay, so topics and questions for today. What are we covering? Well, what is the Radiant pack stylistically? We often get these questions of like, well, what do these packs look like? Is it the right fit for me? So we're going to help you to kind of figure that out if you're new to it. How do you shoot for the look? How do you get the most out of it when shooting, right? How do you modify the look of the pack? Lighting condition based development. This is our basically our kind of signature process for Visual Flow, which we'll talk about, as well as advanced editing techniques, and of course your guys' example images. So we have plenty of raw files that you all submitted. We're going to dive through all of those. Along the way, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, if you has a question, ask it. I want to see you all in the comments, and I don't care if you hate the edit. I don't care, whatever. As long as you are engaged, let me know. Okay. We have Sakshi from New Delhi, India. Welcome, Sakshi. Okay. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So I want to talk first just the Radiant pack aesthetic. Okay. So what we're talking about with this pack, if we were to define the look, I would say that it's very rich colors, but it's not so much modified. Like Mood Pack is modified to be kind of more warm and have more cinematic like warmth to it, right? These are just rich colors, which means it's dependent on your camera. So you're going to have a lot of very bold and vivid colors depending on your camera and lens combo. It's also going to be pretty high contrast, and it's going to offer a matte black finish, which is going to clip both the blacks and the whites. And this kind of creates that cinematic or filmic kind of vibe. Okay. What I would say first is start with the right image when it comes to this look. I mean, granted, you guys can use any image you'd like with any of our packs, but I feel like if you can pair it with the right image, you can take your photographs that much further. I'll give you examples of this. We have a full tutorial on this, by the way, that's also in the guides. It's completely free. So I have a little excerpt here, but step 3 from that guide, and these are the important pieces that I want to kind of summarize here, is when you're shooting, I want you to shoot from the shadows, okay? What that means is you're typically shooting from the opposite side of the sun, or like I'm going to mention in a moment, you're using the highlights to your advantage, right? But this is shooting from the shadows. So our subject's faces are kind of in the shadow, and when we lift it out, we get something like this. We want to make sure that when we're doing this, we're maximizing dynamic range, okay? This is another example of shooting from the shadows. Again, relying on the cameras to capture dynamic range. So what that means is you're going to shoot raw, you're going to expose and use your histogram, making sure that you have basically as much of the highlights as possible without clipping your shadows. So if you're going to emphasize anything here, I would say emphasize shadow retention. You want to make sure that the shadows aren't so dark that they're clipped, because you can get really muddy colors when that happens. And allow the camera to pick up as much of the highlights as it can. Typically when you're doing this, your histogram is going to look like this. It's going to have that U-shaped curve to it. and we're going to lift that out in the edit. So I'm going to go over to Lightroom for just a moment, and I'll show you guys what that might look like over here and why it's so important, okay? So I have a few of these, along with your guys' images, I have a few of my own mixed into here. I'm going to go ahead and select, let's select this one because it's pretty close to a typical HDR image. So this is the typical of what we're looking at, right? And there's actually additional room here to play. So I could have actually exposed this a little bit brighter and still had almost all of my highlights basically retained, right? So it's a little bit dark on this one, but let me go ahead and create a virtual copy of this by pressing Command''. And the benefit of doing this is when I go to the Radiant pack and I select HDR, right? What it's gonna do is actually lift out all the shadows and give me a very dynamic looking image. And typically from here, I would go to, like, say, a retouch with Pop and Enhance. This is an AI-based retouching tool that's going to basically brighten up the subjects, darken the background a little bit. And from this place, I've only basically done 2 clicks on it, right? Just those 2 presets. From this place, this is where I'll brighten up the image a little bit and add on, I might just put on like a little radial burn on them. So this would be my 3rd click, right? And I'm going to do a radial burn. I'm going to place it right over my subjects. So this is the benefit of shooting with the shadows, right? You kind of, or this is the benefit of really maximizing dynamic range. So when I talk about maximizing dynamic range, it's what allows you to basically push and pull an image, especially when you're working with raw files, to get to this place. So as I go back, let me go ahead and flip back to here for a second. That's the point of maximizing dynamic range, okay? Preserving everything, and then we kind of lift it out in the edit. And you're gonna see there's actually a sample image here, which was really close, a community image here that was very close to like being maximized. But you'll see how when the highlights clip, we can't quite pull it back. And I'll show you that example. The next tip I'm going to give you when shooting is to pose with your highlights. So if the sun is coming from like the left side, if you have natural highlights in your scene, try to adjust your subject's pose so that those highlights naturally fall on the face and kind of accentuate the body in a flattering way, okay? So this is an example of like kind of direct light. This is an example of how right after the sun sets, I can kind of angle them towards the light and get a little bit more of this light right on the face. But in every scene, there's a natural angle of light, and use that with the way that you're posing, okay? Typically when you're posing in this way, like when we're not shooting against the sun, right? This is not against the sun. This is not against the sun. Whereas this is against the light. We're shooting from the shadows. When you're shooting with the highlights, it's easier to maximize your dynamic range because you're not going to be shooting basically directly into the light. So your histogram looks a little bit different. But again, I want you to follow the same principles. You're going to shoot raw. You're going to expose to make sure that your histogram basically doesn't have shadow loss, and you allow your camera to pick up as many highlights as it can. Now, if you're on the Sony or the Nikon side of this, by the way, you have a bit of an advantage there because they tend to pick up 1 to 2 stops more of those highlights than Canon. But even with Canon or any of the other brands, if you expose properly, you'll get a ton of dynamic range out of them, okay? Let me know if all that makes sense, if you have any questions on that, and I'm gonna kind of keep going through here as we go. So the next piece that I wanted to cover was how do you modify or tweak the presets, okay? So these were the 2 tips on shooting that we just gave. Let's talk about modifying and adjusting. If you're a visual flow preset user already, I want you to screenshot this. So screenshot this because anytime you want to modify the presets, this is how you're going to do it. This is the settings that you're going to use to basically modify, and you'll make sure that there's no masking selected, okay? But basically, what I want you to think about is when you look at the tone curve, this is where we get our contrast and exposure adjustments. With our new presets, we're actually not building in exposure adjustments, but contrast is in the tone curve. HSL is going to be color tones, and hue and shift is going to give you like a little bit of calibration, okay? So let's go back to this Lightroom for just a second. And I'm going to select another image, okay? Let's select this image, and I'll create a virtual copy of this. And again, I could have exposed this a little bit brighter. No worries though. When you apply Radiant, it doesn't do any exposure boost like our other packs. So if the image is a bit dark to begin with, as you apply it, it's going to look dark. Not a big deal. You're just going to brighten the exposure. Okay. So I'm going to bring the exposure up. So if anywhere you feel like there's adjustments you want to make, like maybe I want more clarity overall in my images. Maybe I want a bit more vibrance. Maybe I want to adjust the tone curve. Tone curve, by the way, like I said, is where the contrast adjustment is. So if you want to, well, you can see that the highlights are basically clipped right here. The shadows are also clipped. this is what gives it that kind of like filmic vibe, right? So it's what makes it so that the highlights aren't too bright and the shadows aren't too dark. They kind of gray out on both sides. But you can always adjust this. You can make an adjustment, whatever you do as you want it saved, right? So I might make adjustments with my colors, anything. I would go over to the preset that I used and right click and then click update with current settings. This is where I'm going to look at that screenshot right here because I want everything selected. So you're going to go check all with the exception of white balance and exposure. These are the two things that I don't want, and make sure you don't have any masking selected. Then go ahead and click update and it'll update your preset with those new settings. And if at any point you feel like you ruined it, by the way, you can always just go and reinstall them again. Okay, so there's not really any risk here of modifying these to your heart's content. If there's any mistakes or whatnot, you can just go back and reset it out with a reinstall. All right, let's come back here for a sec and let's just check out what else we got. Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention before we dive into the edits is lighting condition based development. What this means is you'll notice that every single visual flow pack is organized this way. So what we do is we define a look. So Radiant is a look, right? And then from that, we actually adapt the look to all the different lighting conditions that we consistently shoot in as photographers. So that way, when you're editing, if you're shooting in hard light versus soft light, if it's backlit versus tungsten, all of these require different adjustments to them, right? So we build those into the different lighting conditions, so that way you don't have to modify the preset on your own. And this saves a tremendous amount of time. So what I'd always recommend is just start with the lighting condition that most closely matches the image that you're editing. And you'll know because there's a little description right next to each one of these that kind of defines it. And I've also given you a description right here, which again, you guys can screenshot as well. But let's jump back to this for one sec. I'll give you an example of this, okay? So for example, in this scene, I'm going to create a virtual copy real quick. This is a high dynamic range scene. We've got a very bright background. We have subjects in the dark. So I'm going to go ahead and create or select the HDR natural. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and brighten up my exposure a little bit. And from here, I would go to like additional steps like my AI retouch, right? So I might select retouch with pop and enhance. This layers on those adjustments that are going to be made for the background, subject, everything. And that's insanely quick, right? Like we literally got here from there to there in 3 clicks. But that's what I'm saying is you want to start with the lighting condition that's most closely aligned with the image. So if I go to this image, for example, I'd say this is like indoors, but it's pretty hard lighting because you have very bright highlights and very dark shadows. So that's what I'm going to select. I'll create a virtual copy and then select hard light. And I'm going to go ahead and brighten this up. And usually with Radiant, the one thing that I will use, because Radiant comes in with a lot of punch and a lot of contrast. So if the image has a lot to begin with, you might find that you want to tweak with the blacks. So just slide the black up a bit and we get to a really nice place. But it's as easy as that, just selecting the right lighting condition. Here, I would say this is probably soft light, right? Because we don't have a lot of flare. There's not low contrast here. So I'm going to select soft light. I'm going to go ahead and brighten the image. And it looks fantastic. Like I don't really need to do anything else from there. So choose the lighting condition that is most close to the image that you're basically working with, okay? And all the heavy lifting is essentially done for you. All right, so last little bit, let's go ahead and just dive in and start doing advanced edits with your guys' images. So let's go back to Lightroom for a sec. Not for a sec, for basically the rest of this. And let me know, by the way, if there's any questions thus far. I'm going to go ahead and bring this over to the left just so I can see it while I work as well. Okay, we have Lena said, couldn't join for a few weeks. I'm glad you're back, Lena. And we always have the replays as well, Lena. So if you miss out, don't stress. Prabdeep says, thanks for doing this. I want to create my own custom style for my studio. I have visual for presets. But if I use different every time, I lack consistency, similar shot. Yeah. So I tend to like for our Linen Jersa portfolio, the vast majority of images in Linen Jersa's portfolio is basically modern and crush. Those are the two that we kind of focus in on. But yeah, it can, if you're using a whole mixture of different looks, it can look a little bit strange in a portfolio because everything isn't quite cohesive, right? So I do recommend sticking to looks or looks that are kind of like compatible with each other too, okay? All right, so we have first, I'm just going to go kind of in order of what I've got here. So we're looking at all the different edits. We have Shona Nystrom right here. Thank you for submitting, Shona. Let's go ahead and dive right into this. I'll make sure you guys can see everything perfect. And I'll create a virtual copy. That way I can export these and upload them so you guys can actually look at them in the group. I'll put them up as a post. So what am I going to do? This scene to me is basically a soft light scene. I wouldn't try to preserve these like kind of highlights in the background. I would just go soft light, okay? I dig the vibe it already has. I'm going to brighten up a little bit. I kind of like the background being bright, especially because Shona, you did a great job framing them over this bright area, so it doesn't really bug me that much. If it does, you could always do like a retouch with Pop and Enhance, which is going to pull back some of the background. But honestly, for a scene like this, I don't know that I would do that. It feels like it just has a nice natural vibe from here, and I really dig it, okay? You will notice that the Radiant Pack adds a lot of richness to skin tones, okay? So if you need to tweak or modify, just bring your temperature back a smidge, and I actually really like it right there. It actually was really nice where it was shot too, so I'm just gonna leave it right there. Okay, so honestly, that's the only thing that I would really do to an image like this. I feel like on a shot like this, if you try and preserve too much of the background with like HDR, then it tends to look overly busy and a bit distracting. So this is kind of a personal preference. You could always land in between two. One of the things that I mention a lot is that you can use the lighting conditions stylistically. So like you can kind of bounce between these and see like what level of shadow retention do I want versus highlights. And maybe I go, okay, you know what, for this image, I'm going to go with hard light because it gives me a little bit of a balance there. And you can kind of fine tune. Nice shot. Oh, I love this one. This is cute. Great pose, everything. One thing, Shona, too, I'd mentioned with this last shot is just the way that the body and the chin is kind of tucked behind the shoulder right there is a little bit awkward. I would open her out a little bit more, like kind of turn her towards the camera just a little bit more so that you get a little more form in the body and the head isn't fully kind of tucked behind the shoulder. It looks like a large block kind of right there. But sorry, this is more of an edit than anything, but I like to sometimes give little tips along the way in the shooting side too. Okay, let's go ahead and just tweak this straightness right there so I'm not going to have an OCD meltdown. And let's go ahead. This is definitely a soft light scene, so I'm just going to select soft light, and I'm going to get my white balance, okay? With a scene like this, I'm honestly not going to do really much else. I really dig this. I might bring the blacks up just a little bit, Shona, but like there's already good contrast in this. I don't feel like I need to burn down the background because there's already a nice sort of highlight right on them. They're the brightest part in the scene. If I do any more to this, it's gonna take it too far. So honestly, one click for this one, and I'm good. Okay, we did this image. Let me go ahead and finish this image out for y'all. Okay, so this is one of my shots. I'm gonna go ahead and just darken, or not darken, I'm gonna go ahead and bring the white balance to a place that makes a little bit more sense. And there's a lot of greens being reflected here, so I might actually bring the pinks, the magenta back into it a little bit too. From here, I'm going to go ahead and knock out. One thing I would recommend, by the way, is if you have local adjustments like healing and things like that, do those adjustments before you actually want to like apply AI adjustments, basically. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do that retouch with Pop and Enhance, right? And what this does is it layers on like 15 layers of adjustments. And if I don't do this, if I don't do my background stuff first, it can get really slow. So what I'm going to do is dial this back one notch. And I'll show you what I mean. So look at how many layers are being added here that are brightening eyes, enhancing the background, doing all that. If I try and go and heal stuff now, then it slows down quite a bit. So generally what we say is you do your healing and things before you apply an AI adjustment. But this is really nice. The last thing that I like to do, so my 3-step workflow, which I literally, if you guys have been in these live edits, you guys know my 3-step workflow by now. I go my preset, and then I do an AI-based adjustment, and then I throw on a radial filter if I want extra attention drawn to the center. For this one, I might lift the blacks just a little bit, so it's not too contrasty. All right, we'll skip. You guys don't want to see more of my images, so let's just go right to this one. So this image is from Margie Tem. Margie, let's go ahead and create a virtual copy. And I'm going to go ahead and do this. So Margie, this one's a little bit on the dark side, but that's okay. You've still preserved your shadows. We don't have any shadow loss. But I would say like you could probably expose up here. So look, I'm about 1.5 stops brighter right now, and we still have all of our highlights. So this is the place that I would expose just to make it a little bit easier, and this maximizes your dynamic range, right? For this scene, honestly, you're probably going to be between soft light. You can go hard light if you want to retain a little more background. You can also go HDR. I actually like the soft light vibe in this, so I'm just going to go soft light. I'm going to brighten this up a little bit more. Okay, bring a little bit of the greens back. There we go. And all I'm going to do is go back up to my, let's go to retouch with pop and enhance. So again, this lifts my subject, darkens the background, adds a bit of dodge and burning, all of it automatic. And it gives me like a nice pop. And the last thing I'm going to do is go to my radial burn and go right over. So this is that classic kind of 3-step workflow. I'm going to expand this so I don't have darkening arms or anything like that. And I'm going to call it good. So look at that. There's the before, there's the after with this. And I love, like you'll see on the histogram, how the tone curve is clipping off the top end of the highlights and the bottom of the shadows. If I were to remove this for a second, like if you were to take this off, look at the heavy lifting that tone curve is doing. It's not only adding contrast, but it's also giving it that matte finish that creates a very cinematic vibe. So great shot, Shona, or no, Margie, wrong that one. This one is from Eugene Mazura. So let's go ahead and create a virtual copy. Looks like there's already some light added to her. So all I'm going to do is, this one looks like kind of a tungsten lighting effect, like the majority of the light is tungsten. So I'm going to go ahead and select tungsten. So it kind of helps to even that out a bit. And then I'm going to brighten up for the face. And then from there, there's already a lot of contrast in this scene, right? The background is quite dark. We're adding light on the face. So if you feel like it's too much contrast, again, just go to that black point and lift the blacks up, okay? And you're good, like right about here. I like the depth and the contrast. I'm not going to do anything else to this image. I might do this, like if you wanted to, you could use the AI retouching toolkit without the enhancement of the background. Just do a portrait retouch on this. And what it'll do is kind of lift out the clothing. It softens the skin. And you can dial this up or down. So if I go up, you'll see it kind of has more of an effect versus down. But look at this. It looks gorgeous. And from here, you can always tweak white balance too. But I feel like the white balance is pretty spot on, actually. All right, I dig that. I love the flattening of the blacks in this image too. It looks really, really nice. Okay, so this one's from Margie Tem as well. Let's go ahead and create a virtual copy. So Margie, this is the image that I was talking about, where it looks like you're adding a light right here, which we'd probably nix this in Photoshop. I think we could potentially do this now with Lightroom's new AI adjustments. But let's do this. I want to show you where, so look at your highlight clipping. So if I pull this back, right, you'll notice that that's the only cloud detail that I got. And this right here, how it's just like locked off right there, tells me that it's blown out, because there's no detail, there's no information beyond that range. So that's kind of what I was saying here. So what I would do though is, this would be an HDR shot. I would apply HDR and I'd pull it back for basically skin tones. And you'll start to see that we do actually retain a good amount of the clouds, but because there was no more information there, the rest of that information is clipped. The good thing is that this preset actually helps to mitigate that. When you flatten the highlights like this, on a blown out image, it actually makes it look a bit more natural, right? Whereas if I turn off the curve, you can see how it's like very blown out there. But because of that, it's softer, it looks a little more natural. What I would do here is add a little bit more temperature to this, maybe bring it back a little bit of the tint since we're surrounded by red rocks. There we go. And the thing is, I could add like retouch with pop and enhance to kind of lift the subjects and darken the background, right? But if I do this too much, notice how the background, it's already kind of gone a little bit. So if I do it too much, it won't look good. So I wouldn't go too far with this because we don't have the detail there to begin with. But even then, look at the before versus the after. Okay. Hopefully that helps too as you're shooting. All right, these are from Gabriel Mora. Let's go ahead, create our virtual copy. And let me know if you all have any questions, by the way. If you guys are just tuning in, we're right in the middle of a community live edit. This replay will be available as well, and it'll be saved to our guides. So welcome. We have Lubomir from Bulgaria. Welcome, Lubomir. Okay, so for this image, this is one where I would go to like this low contrast. See how there's kind of like flares coming through? There's also some foreground elements too in this image, which are creating a little bit of a loss of contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and go backlight and use this a little bit more stylistically, okay? I'm going to brighten up the image a little bit. And let's do this. I'm going to lift the black point. One thing I like to do is sometimes you have a lot of, like if you have shadows over the eyes, Radiant can very much, because it adds a lot of contrast, right? It can very much darken the eyes. So just use that black point to pull it up to a spot where it's a bit more natural, okay? Right here's good. I also noticed that they're surrounded by reflective greens. So I'm going to add a little bit of tint, and we're going to warm them up a little bit to get a little bit more of the pinks back into their skin. Okay, so it's not too green. Right about there is good. From here, I'd probably skip the AI-based adjustments and just go with a, I'm just going to do a radial burn that's placed directly over them. Okay, and adjust the angle of this. If you're not using the presets, by the way, when we do the radial burn, it's literally just a mask. So it's a circular mask filter that just has a negative 0.5. So it's a radial filter with a negative 0.5 on it, that's all. It's off of my finishing touch. Okay, that looks really nice. Okay, this one, let's go ahead and fix the crop and then create a virtual copy. So I would say this goes right under soft light, right? As far as lighting conditions, I'm going to brighten this up a little bit. I'm going to add a bit more of the black point back in. This is probably one where I do want a little bit of, I want to lift the subjects out of the background and do a little bit of retouch. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. It's going to darken the cement and everything around them a bit to help lift them out of the frame more. And we can always play with this if we want more or less. I'll probably actually go with a medium on that one, like a mid-level. Make a little adjustment here for temperature and tint, and a bit less contrast, and I love this. That's gorgeous. Okay. By the way, I tend to edit my images a little bit on the bright and a bit on the warm side. So if you feel like it's a bit too bright, or if you feel like it's a bit too warm, that's a stylistic thing, and you guys can make adjustments. I like a little bit brighter and a little bit warmer because it tends to be flattering for skin tones. It hides kind of cracks and different things in the skin. So check this out. This scene is soft light, but you're surrounded by reflective red rock, right? So we actually make this red tint version of each preset because brick causes that. And this will automatically adjust the color tones so that you kind of go back towards an image that is less red. Because if I don't apply this, if I just go soft light, look at how red their skin tones are, versus if I go red tint, it fixes the massive majority of that. And then all I'm going to do from here is adjust the tint back a little bit as well. And now I can find a white balance that looks far, far more natural. Still stylistic, but natural. I'll lift the blacks a little bit on this image. This image, I definitely want my retouch with pop and enhance. Let's check out how much of it we want. So let's start with the median or the middle version. And that might be a little bit too much for me. So I'm going to back it off and instead put a radial burn on them. Ooh, and I love that. Okay. That's fantastic. I'll just drop it right over the face, angle it, and look at this. Beautiful. If I see still a little bit too much reds, I can just back that off a little bit more and get to a nice spot right there. Love it. Okay, this one's from Jesse Brame. So Jesse, this is a raw file. We can still edit it and work with it, but you'd be able to get better results, Jesse, if this were a JPEG file. But I think you submitted this one and you're like, what do I do with this lighting condition? Let me show you. So first, I'll create our virtual copy. I would say your exposure should have been probably somewhere up here. So you're about 2 stops under, and that becomes more problematic when you're shooting JPEG. So if we're shooting JPEG, we don't have as much detail there. If you're shooting RAW, you'd be able to retain more. But that's okay. This still looks fine as I've lifted it out. Let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is go down to Radiant. And this is where I would drop into probably like a tungsten adjustment, because tungsten is going to be closest to these fluorescent lights that are overhead. It's a little bit different. You could also do tungsten mix. It takes away some of the blues as well. But either of those two works fine. And then what I would do from here is start lifting the blacks a little bit. Okay, so lift the blacks, maybe even reduce a little bit of contrast, because you've got a lot of contrast dropping over the face with that with the fluorescent light and the way that she's posed. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is the retouch with pop and enhance. This is going to go ahead and retouch her face. It's going to lift, it's going to do everything, and you can see it lifted some of those shadows as well. It also darkens the background, and I can see how far with this I want to go. I like that first layer, and I'm just going to go with a radial burn from here and drop it right over the face. Okay. So even with a shot where you feel like, oh man, what do I do with this? I totally didn't get what I wanted. We can still get to a really nice result with the right kind of editing steps. All right. Gabriel asked, Gabriel had a question. So normally you use modern for this. Yeah, Gabriel, I would say, like, if you think about the different packs, this Radiant pack is a little bit of a mixture between mood and modern. So it retains more of the in-camera colors, but it has a little bit of the warmth from modern and the matte kind of finish from the kind of cinematic packs. So it's a little bit of a blend between them. You get the updates, by the way, by just downloading and reinstalling. So just download the develop installer and then reinstall it and you're good to go. Okay. This image is from Jason Holt. Let's do our virtual copy. And let's dive in. What's up, Ashwin from Maridas? Maridius? I don't know how to say that. We've got Tito as well from the Netherlands. What's going on, guys? Okay, so this one's from Jason Holt. Let's do this. So this is a high dynamic range scene, right? We've got really bright skies. It looks like we have a decent amount of detail there, so it doesn't look like it's completely clipped. See, as I darken it down, the color comes in, so that's perfect. So let's go HDR, and we get a beautiful lift right there. That looks fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and go to my my AI retouching toolkit. Let's go ahead and do one stop first. And again, like I said, if sometimes we go too much on these, it can look a bit too dramatic. So I'm going to go right in the middle, and then I'm going to drop in this, let's go ahead and do our radial burn right over our subject. And I love this. This is a beautiful example of how retaining your let me go ahead and I'll do a crop adjustment on both, but how retaining your dynamic range can really make a huge difference. So look at this. That's pretty insane, right? That's wild, like how much we can retain there. I'm going to flatten the contrast a tiny, tiny bit and just darken a little bit. And I love it. That's great. Okay, here we have another one. This is from Jason Holt as well, a little bit more of a challenging lighting condition, right? So, and Jason, I saw your edit on this and it looked really good too. I'm going to give you a different version. This is going to be more stylized because it's the Radiant pack. But check this out. What we're going to do is let's go ahead and come down here to tungsten. I think I'm going to select tungsten mix just because we have kind of a mixture of fluorescent and overhead. But you could just go tungsten too, either way. But I'm going to go tungsten mix. We're going to bring our exposure back up. And I'm going to come back up here for that AI piece, the retouch with pop and enhance, okay? What this is going to do is kind of darken the background, brighten her up, and I'm going to find a level of this that I like. Right about here, it looks natural. I feel like if I go a step further, it looks okay. Actually, this still looks okay. So let's leave it there. We'll leave it right in the middle. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in that radial burn, okay? I'm going to place it right over the center. All right. And what I'm looking to do with that is sort of darken the ground and darken this top piece. And I'll need to do a little bit more. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get our white balance dialed in now. So right about here, I'm going to flatten out the contrast a little bit, add a little bit more blacks to this, okay? And you can see how we're lifting her out while kind of darkening the background. The next thing I'm going to do is with this mask, I'm going to go ahead and just, you can pull the amount up right here, or I can just bring the exposure down. So I'm going to bring the exposure down a little more. I'm looking at the ground, and I just want the ground to be a bit darker, okay? And now I kind of want the this overhead piece to be a little bit darker as well. So I'm going to lift the blacks a little bit more, and I'm going to add one more radial gradient, or a linear gradient. So we're going to go from the top down, and here I'm just going to pull the exposure down as well. I'm also going to grab a little of the highlights and bring those down, just so that the top of this is not too overly bright. Now this is where I would look at it and go, okay, do I like how she's lifted out of the frame, or do I want to dial this back? Remember, you can always dial this back at any point, right? Like I can go click forward, click backwards, and it replaces the existing masks. So it's not gonna add new ones. We designed this to basically replace the existing ones, so that way it's an easy way to kind of adjust. So I'm gonna leave it right here, but you could always take it a little bit further if you wanted to, or you can lighten it up a bit. But look at how we go from this kind of dark image where the background's the brightest element to lifting her out. It's like we added flash to her. It looks fantastic. So awesome. Okay. All right, my friends, let's do, we have a couple minutes, and I figure we'll just go back and do a couple bonus edits for some of the ones that I skipped over. So for some of the images, I think we have them mostly done. What I would do for an image like this is I'm going to go back to, and by the way, if there's any questions that I haven't addressed or anything, just let me know. But I'm going to go for my Tools AI and just do a bit of portrait retouch on this image. And you'll see that it kind of lifts out. So I'm going to choose, on this one, I feel I can go all the way and it's not going to be too much. I'm also going to just kind of adjust my crop. Hold down Alt and Option to constrain portions. Sorry, Alt or Option to constrain when you are cropping. That way you can kind of shrink down and it'll keep the same aspect ratio. Let's show a little more of that. There we go. Nice. Okay. For an image like this one, I actually really like where this is at right now. I would, I think I already added the mask. I would just kind of test and see if I want a little bit more of the retouch on the face And I think I do. Like, look at kind of the skin and everything gets a little bit softer and pulled together there. Same thing with this one. We already have I don't think I added any layers to this. So I'm going to actually do the retouch with Pop and Enhance. So it kind of darkens the background too a little bit. Just a subtle amount to kind of lift them out. Now this lets me darken. I'm going to go down in my tint just a little bit, up in my temperature. That looks really nice. This is another great one where we can play with and get a little bit more out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring up my portrait retouch. That's nice. I like it. This image is kind of further pulled back, so it gives me a little more room to play. I'm going to adjust my composition a little bit, and then the last step I always do is that radial burn. I love the radial burn because it kind of like when we darken down all of the background and we brighten up the subjects, it can kind of look a little bit unnatural, especially if we go too far with it. So I'd say like this is right on the edge where like this is natural. This we start to see a little bit of halo effect around him. It's not too severe, but if we go up further, it gets more severe, right? So if I take this up another notch, that gets more severe. So the way I like to balance this is I'll take it back a notch, take it back a step, and then you can always just exaggerate with a little bit more of that radial burn and get a very similar kind of effect to it while keeping it a bit more on the natural side. All right, my friends. Okay, that is it for me. Let me go ahead and flip this back. Let's go right here. Okay, I'm gonna go side by side. So we will have this complete replay up. If you'd like to learn more about Visual Flow, like I said, you can go to vfpresets.com. Feel free to ask the community their experience with it. Feel free to like check out these live edits. We've done live edits now for almost every pack. My goal is to finish this out where we have a live edit for every single pack. That way you can kind of see if it's going to fit for you. If you're already using the pack, you can get the most out of it by seeing like how I would edit and work with it. But yeah, we have a couple more of these and hope you enjoyed. We'll see you guys inside the group and see you next week on Wednesday. Peace.